The lights on the command deck of the Coalition training vessel Saracon Dawn hummed faintly overhead, the floor still vibrating from the simulated orbital strike the cadets had just endured. The air tasted of ozone and sweat, thick with the scent of fried circuitry and adrenaline. No one had died in the drill, which was more than could be said for their last sim. Cadet James Halter, his navy blue uniform still damp along the neckline, stood at rigid attention, trying not to let his hands tremble. The drill had gone sideways early again, and he'd taken initiative to redirect power manually through a failing coolant line. It had worked, technically. But it had also overridden the deck commander's standing orders to evacuate. And the deck commander, Admiral Velzik Vor, was not known for tolerating improvisation. Especially not from humans. The Admiral loomed now, tall and reptilian, with bony ridges shadowing his eyes. His uniform gleamed like polished stone, and the command insignia at his throat caught the light with every breath. He paced in front of the assembled cadets Tarsini, Drelak, Thorn, Raykal, and Halter, each of them staring straight ahead. "Which of you," Vor asked, his voice gravel and fire, "thought to override an evacuation protocol during a Class 3 plasma breach?" No one spoke. The silence stretched. Halter's heartbeat, still thudding from the simulated near-death minutes earlier, quickened. The Admiral's yellow gaze swung directly to him. "You." "Yes, sir," Halter answered, chest tight. Vor stepped in close. "You believed your judgment superior to Coalition protocol?" "I believed it was the only way to prevent a reactor cascade, sir," Halter replied, trying to keep his voice even. Vor's eyes narrowed. He took another step. And then, without warning, he reached out and grabbed Halter's collar. For his species, it was symbolic, asserting dominance, enforcing order, a simple gesture. It was used regularly during officer training on Vor's homeworld, often accompanied by a growled reprimand or a shove. But to Halter's system, it was something else entirely. Flesh on his neck, pressure at the throat, fingers too close to the carotid. His vision tunneled. There was no thought. The human body has between 5 and 8 seconds of useful consciousness if the carotid arteries are compressed. James Halter didn't give it that long. In a flash of muscle memory drilled into him by old survival instructors on Earth back in Louisiana, in a swamp training camp where they'd taught grab means threat and threat means action, he pivoted. His left hand trapped the Admiral's wrist. His right hand locked under the elbow. He stepped and twisted. There was a sickening crack, followed by an inhuman shriek. The Admiral dropped like a struck statue, folding into the deck. His arm bent at a nightmarish angle, radius and ulna cleanly fractured, the joint hyperextended past tolerance. One of the bones had torn through the skin just below the elbow, white and gleaming under purple blood. The silence that followed was absolute. Halter stood frozen, both hands still raised halfway in defense. His breathing was shallow, shoulders rigid, pupils dilated. He looked at the other cadets. Most had backed against the bulkhead. His voice, when it came, was raw, quiet. "Who's next?" No one moved. The deck officer, a feathered Gorthari lieutenant named Jalin, stumbled forward and hit the emergency beacon. Red light bathed the command bridge. "Medical team inbound." "Security inbound." Halter exhaled once, then sagged against the wall, sliding down to a seated position. His hands shook visibly now, the adrenaline spike draining like water from a broken dam. He stared at the blood on his uniform, Vor's blood, and swallowed hard. "I didn't mean to," he muttered to no one. "I didn't, I just—" The medic who arrived first was Drell's species, and she paused a full second before approaching the Admiral's twisted form. Humerus fracture. No radius and ulna both fractured. Compound. Gods of root and bone, it's through the dermis. She looked at Halter like he was a grenade, with the pin still halfway in. Security entered next. 4 of them, blasters holstered but hands hovering. Halter didn't resist. He just kept whispering, "I didn't mean to." They didn't put him in a brig. Not exactly. Coalition protocol dictated that cadets under investigation, especially following violent incidents, be placed under medical and psychological watch in an isolation suite. It was brightly lit, quiet, sterile. Too sterile. Halter sat on the cot, holding a thermal pack in both hands, not because he was cold, but because it gave his fingers something to do besides twitch. His knuckles were bruised, not badly, no cuts. Just contact bruising from the Admiral's collar pin. He'd thrown up earlier. He hadn't eaten since the drill. A soft chime sounded. Dr. Kendari entered Threxian, tall and lanky, with fronds that drooped gently with age. She wore soft-toned robes and carried a pad with diagnostic readouts. She perched on a stool across from him, patient, calm. "How are you feeling, Cadet Halter?" He didn't answer immediately. "Like my spine's still vibrating," he said finally. "Understandable. I've reviewed your telemetry logs. Your adrenaline spike was extreme. You topped out at nearly 400% baseline in less than half a second." Halter looked up. "Is that not normal? For a Threxian? No. For a human, it's fast, but not unprecedented." She tilted her head. "Tell me what you remember." He did. Step by step. Every flash of movement, every surge of fear, the heat of the Admiral's hand, the way time seemed to bend before it snapped back with the sound of bone breaking. "I didn't even think," he said again. "I didn't know I'd hurt him until I heard the scream." "Reflexive self-defense," Dr. Kendari noted. "You had training?" He nodded. "Earthside. I grew up in a rough area. I got jumped a few times, joined a community defense program, learned to protect myself." She made a note. "Did anyone ever grab you like that before?" "Yeah," he said. "Once. Didn't end well for that guy either." The doctor looked thoughtful. "Your psychological evaluation suggests no aggressive tendencies. You're rated high on empathy, low on dominance indicators, but your trauma scan flagged a few markers." "I'm not a threat," Halter said quickly. "I didn't say you were." There was a pause. She continued, softer. "What you experienced was a conditioned survival response. Humans from high-risk environments, what some of your kind call Deathworlders, have deeply embedded threat protocols. Physical contact near the neck is particularly triggering." She stood, folding the pad closed. "The Admiral's surgery is ongoing. They've reconstructed the joint with synthebone and stabilized the fracture. Recovery will take a minimum of 8 standard weeks, possibly longer if nerve bundles were impacted." "I'm sorry," Halter said, and meant it. "I believe you. But this incident has already reached the Coalition Command Council." Halter's gut turned over. "There will be hearings, cultural evaluations, debates about protocol. But for now, you are not under arrest." He looked up in disbelief. "You're under observation, and you're going to need a full stress cycle decompression and some trauma processing." He slumped back against the wall. "Will I still graduate?" She smiled faintly. "That depends on how many admirals you disable between now and final exams." The lights in the observation room dimmed as the playback began. 12 officers sat behind a curved pane of transparent alloy, their seats slightly elevated. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and neutralizer, the kind used to scrub scent from shared species environments. A different kind of cleansing was happening here, administrative, political, surgical. On the wall, the footage rolled again. "Pause it there," requested Commander Atrali, a Drell with a voice like rusted wire. "Zoom on the contact point." The image froze at the instant. Admiral Vor's hand seized James Halter's collar. The human's body language in the frame was textbook. Shoulders stiffened, eyes widened, arms rising. "Proceed." They watched it again. The movement took less than a second, but the medical overlay highlighted joint angles, torque vectors, and the exact moment the Admiral's elbow exceeded physiological tolerance. A shrill alarm marked the break, a red waveform illustrating the fracture's severity. Silence followed. Captain Ross, the human officer assigned to Coalition training oversight, cleared her throat. "As you can see, this was a reflex arc, not a planned attack. His central nervous system reacted before conscious override was possible. The injury, while severe, was not intentional." Admiral Selch, representing Vor's species, the Velkarn, flicked his tongue against his inner jaw. "Reflex or not, he broke a superior officer's arm in front of the entire cadet squad. Is this what Deathworlder integration offers? Public humiliation and shattered limbs?" Ross didn't blink. "With respect, your species' dominance displays are understood within your own chain of command. But Halter is not Velkarn. To a human, collar grabbing is threatening, even triggering. Especially post-simulation, when stress hormones are still elevated." Another officer, a burly Gorthari with shimmering green feathers, leaned in. Perhaps cadets from violent worlds shouldn't serve in shared unit training at all. Then why recruit them? Ross replied evenly. You want humans for first contact teams, hazard deployments, deep space missions? You value the adaptability, the combat instinct, but you cannot isolate the trait you want from the environment that created it. General murmurs followed. The playback was requested again. This time, it ran through the aftermath halter's trembling stance. The blood, the quiet challenge. Who's next? 3 days later, James sat cross-legged on a padded mat in the isolation wing's multi-purpose room. He wasn't in restraints, but it didn't feel like freedom either. Everything was soft-edged, rounded corners, no sharp tools or sudden noises. A kindness wrapped in suspicion. A new visitor stepped in short, with a wide-set face and large, glassy eyes. "Counselor Crayman," she said, gesturing to herself. "I'm here to help you, James." "Psych eval number 3?" he asked. "Number 4, she corrected gently. "But don't think of it like a test, think of it like a decompression." He didn't answer. She sat on a floor cushion across from him. "Can we talk about your upbringing?" James exhaled slowly. "Grew up in Shreveport, Earthside. Not the good part. My mom was a nurse, Dad left early, spent more time dodging street fights than doing homework." "Did you experience physical threats often?" He nodded. "It's not a sob story. It just was." She tilted her head. "The kind of training you received, was it formal?" "I joined a youth protection program. They taught us holds, pressure releases, basic survival. The collar grab move? That was literally lesson 1. Crayman took a slow breath. "Did you ever intend to hurt Admiral Vore?" James looked at his hands. "No, I didn't even know what happened until he screamed." She watched him for a long time, then switched tactics. "Do you understand why everyone is so shaken by what happened?" "I do now," he said. "They think I'm a threat, that I lost control." "Did you?" He thought about it. The heat, the fear, the muscle snap of instinct. He didn't feel like he'd chosen anything, but that didn't mean it wasn't him. "Yeah," he said softly. "I did. Just not on purpose." The Admiral's recovery had not been quiet. Coalition surgeons rebuilt the joint with layered synthobone and an adjustable ligament matrix, standard but complicated by nerve exposure from the compound fracture. They estimated 8 weeks before he could move the arm fully, again more if synaptic signaling was compromised. Pain management for Velkarn was notoriously difficult. Vore's species metabolized analgesics at 10 times the human rate, making sedation a constant balancing act. The medical wing hadn't stopped smelling like antiseptic and charred protein since day 1. Still, the Admiral insisted on a meeting. 6 days post-incident, still in a sling and wearing a stiff support brace, Admiral Vore requested that Cadet Halter be brought to his private convalescence chamber under guard, of course. 2 Gorthari security officers flanked James as he stepped in. Vore sat upright, eyes sharp. "Sit." James obeyed, folding into the chair across from the Admiral's desk. The silence stretched like a tight wire. "I have had my arm broken once before," Vore began. "During my first combat tour, a boarding action on a pirate vessel. Took a hull spike through the triceps. Lost use of the limb for 4 months." James kept his eyes forward. "This is worse," Vore continued, "because it happened on my own deck, by a cadet. I didn't mean." Silence. Another pause. "I have reviewed the footage more times than I care to admit," the Admiral said. "I now understand the cause. What I did was culturally normal for my people, but not for yours. It seems I committed an act of unintentional aggression." James blinked. "I do not apologize," Vore said stiffly, then sighed. "But I acknowledge the miscalculation. I underestimated the volatility of your kind's survival instincts." "That's fair," James said quietly. Vore leaned forward. "What you did was not forgivable, but it was understandable. That distinction may one day keep you alive." James met his eyes. "Is that what this is? A warning?" "It's a recognition," Vore said, "that you may yet serve the Coalition, but you will do so under new protocol, for your safety, and ours." The protocols came swiftly. All Coalition instructors were issued a new directive. No physical contact with cadets from high-reactivity species without consent or immediate life-threatening cause. Simulations would now include post-event cooldown periods to allow adrenaline and cortisol levels to normalize. Mixed-species training teams would undergo cultural reflex briefings before joint drills. And James Halter? He was reassigned. Temporarily removed from cadet rotation, he entered a 10-week program on stress modulation, interspecies cue recognition, and reflex override conditioning. He was also paired with a mentor, Captain Ross herself. Their first session began with her tossing him a foam collar. "You break it, you buy it," she said flatly. James raised an eyebrow. "Seriously?" Lesson 1. Desensitization. If I grab your collar during a simulation, you flinch, not break bones. He looked at the collar, then back at her. "I'm still not sure I belong here," he admitted. Ross didn't smile, but her tone softened. "You do. But you're going to need to prove to everyone, including yourself, that you can handle it, that you're not just a walking trigger response." He nodded. The work had begun. The simulation deck was quieter now, not because the drills had changed. If anything, they were more grueling, but because every species was watching each other a little more closely. Especially the humans. Cadet James Halter, back on rotation after 4 weeks of stress response training, felt it in every glance. Nobody said it out loud, but the space between him and everyone else was just a little wider. Like his body carried an invisible charge, and proximity might trigger something. He'd passed all 3 re-entry assessments. His grip strength had returned to baseline, cortisol levels stabilized within acceptable limits, and he no longer flinched when his commanding officer raised her voice. The collar reflex was still there, buried under layers of training, but it no longer fired unless it had to. Captain Ross had made sure of that. Still, he could feel the eyes. Especially from the alien cadets. Especially when Admiral Vor re-entered the picture. It happened during a strategic operations module. Vor, now 3 weeks post-surgery, entered the auditorium with his right arm still wrapped in a high-tension support brace. He didn't speak about the incident. Didn't look at Halter. But his presence alone set the tone. When the lecture ended and the cadets filed out, Vor remained seated. Halter lingered near the door, waiting for Ross. "Cadet Halter," the Admiral said, finally turning his head. James straightened. "Sir." "Walk with me." He didn't request security this time. They strolled the corridor together, flanked by decorative panels etched with coalition campaign histories. Vor's steps were steady, controlled. "I have reviewed over 70 hours of human close-quarters combat footage," Vor said abruptly, "including historical training methods, martial arts, police engagements, even bar fights." James nodded cautiously. "Did you find what you were looking for?" "No, but I found something I wasn't expecting." The Admiral paused by a display panel showing the Battle of Kavari Spire. His uninjured hand gestured to the human units. "You teach small children to respond to physical threats with bone-breaking techniques. You embed muscle memory into adolescence that bypasses logical inhibition. Your species trains for worst-case scenarios as a standard." "We train to survive," James said, "because if we don't, we die." Vor looked at him. "You say that like it is normal." "For us, it island." The Admiral nodded once. "I now understand why you reacted the way you did. Your actions were not a failure of discipline. They were the product of your evolutionary environment." "That's what the counselors keep telling me." Vor exhaled through his nose slits. "When I grabbed your collar, I expected submission. I received a reminder that command structures do not transcend biology." They stood in silence. Then Vor added, "Your record will remain intact. You will graduate with full honors, assuming continued compliance with new reflex containment protocols. But understand this, I will not forget what you are." "I don't expect you to," James replied. The Admiral walked away. Elsewhere, in a polished meeting chamber 3 decks below, a very different conversation was unfolding. "I don't care how politically inconvenient it is," said Captain Ross, leaning over the projection table. "You cannot keep assigning Deathworlders into standardized protocol and expect clean outcomes." Her audience consisted of 4 command officers and 2 diplomatic observers. One was a Charnathi liaison with bioluminescent skin, whose patterns flickered nervously throughout the meeting. A Valari Admiral, the Coalition's current ethics compliance overseer, flicked a claw across the file displayed before her. You suggest segregated training? No, Ross said firmly. I suggest integrated command modifications. Interspecies teams need more than language translators and etiquette briefings. They need stress scale harmonization. Recognize that a Charnathi panic looks like a Gorthari sneeze, and that a human at rest is still physiologically closer to crisis state than most species at peak tension. The diplomatic observer raised a hand. But wouldn't that unfairly isolate humans as dangerous? Not if we educate properly, Ross said. Right now, the problem is ignorance. Vor didn't know that collar contact would trigger a threat reflex. He treated Halter like a Velkarn subordinate. That ignorance broke his arm. The Valari Admiral narrowed her eyes. You are advocating for entirely new command protocols based on one incident. Ross leaned back. It won't stay one incident. We've seen similar spikes in post-drill human reactions. They're just not as dramatic. You want to avoid scandal? You start prevention now. The room fell quiet. A soft tone marked the conclusion of the meeting. The Valari Admiral gave a short nod. We will draft a policy proposal for cross-species contact restrictions. Consider it a probationary adjustment. James Halter's probation period came with surprises. He was allowed to resume full cadet duties, but under close observation. His bunk was moved to a quieter wing, shared with a Drelak who'd actually volunteered, curious, apparently, about humans. James didn't complain. One night, his new bunkmate, Kren, asked the question outright. Do you still feel the urge to hurt someone when they grab you? James blinked. No, I didn't feel an urge to hurt anyone then. I felt like I was about to be choked. Kren's brow flaps lowered. That fast? It doesn't feel fast. It feels like the world just narrows, like tunnel vision. But yeah, it's fast. Kren looked thoughtful. Your species is terrifying. We're not trying to be. The alien chuckled. That's what makes it worse. By week 7, James was scheduled for final evaluation drills. This time, the simulation included a constructed scenario of diplomatic unrest, non-combat, tension-heavy, multiple species. The kind of operation where instinct was the enemy. James handled it with near-perfect control. No raised voice, no involuntary tensing when a Velkarn officer passed behind him. He even corrected a Gorthari who barked orders too close to another cadet's face. The examiners noted all of it. At the debrief, Ross gave him a simple nod. You're cleared. He didn't smile, but he exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for a month. The final review board was quiet. The Coalition rarely held public commendations for incidents that began with violence, but there were political ripples to contain. Halter was called in uniform to the command chamber, where a small delegation waited. The Valari Admiral stood first. Cadet Halter, your incident initiated a review of our interspecies conduct policies. Based on the findings, we have enacted several new regulations aimed at reducing unintended conflicts between command structures. She turned to a display behind her. Effective immediately, Coalition Protocol Delta 7 is expanded to include tactile contact regulations and reflex mapping for all high-reactivity species, including humans, Tarsini, and Drelak. James stood at attention. This is not an award, she continued. It is an acknowledgement. Your injury to Admiral Vor was unintentional but informative. We thank you for your continued cooperation. Then, unexpectedly, Admiral Vor stood. He stepped forward, braced arm now uncovered, the visible lines of surgical reconstruction fading under regrowth tissue. I once believed that discipline required strength, that dominance must be enforced physically. I now understand that leadership must also account for difference. I acted in ignorance. James nodded. Slow. Then, we both learned something. 2 months after the collar incident, the Saracen Dawn returned to standard operations. Its burnished hull, once riddled with simulated fire scoring and stress welds from combat drills, gleamed again under station lighting as cadets funneled back into scheduled modules. Time, as always in space, moved forward without waiting for anyone's approval. Cadet James Halter moved with it. His name no longer trailed whispers in the corridors. The incident had slipped, not forgotten, but folded into the vessel's quiet lore, part cautionary tale, part doctrine case study. Instructors referenced it with clipped neutrality, reflex protocol review, see Halter Vor incident. James carried the weight of it carefully, not with pride, not with shame, with understanding. He'd earned that. But understanding wasn't always mutual. The morning of the final interspecies symposium, a formal graduation precursor, James was summoned again, this time not to a medical review or disciplinary panel, but to a teaching bay outfitted with non-lethal restraint systems, foam floors, mirror-lined walls. Waiting inside was an awkwardly familiar face, a Zenthari junior instructor named Pellick, assigned to cultural liaison work. He adjusted his translation rig as James stepped in. "You're early," Pellick said. "You summoned me," James replied. "Said it was mandatory?" The alien fidgeted. "Yes, we've created something." James raised an eyebrow. A screen behind Pellick flickered to life, displaying animated holographic figures, humanoid, quadruped, exoskeletal, all different species. Each ran through a protocol scenario involving command conflict, panic triggers, and restraint procedures. It was oddly cheerful, overly so. "What is this?" "Your legacy," Pellick said, pleased. "It's being rolled out across 3 training vessels. A simulation curriculum, behavioral diffusion scenarios, stress de-escalation modules, and my favorite, a multi-species game called What Happens If You Touch a Human's Neck." James stared at the cartoon version of himself, reflexively disarming a Velkarn with a glowing orange overlay. Pellick continued, "It's interactive, has sound effects, there's a medal system." "I'm a cartoon now." "An educational tool," the alien corrected. "Your incident catalyzed an overhaul. We now teach not just protocols, but biological empathy. You're a module, a cautionary hero." James rubbed his eyes. "I didn't sign up to be a hero." "No, but you survived long enough to become a training requirement." James let out a reluctant chuckle. Then Pellick handed him a small data chip. "This is yours. The original footage. Incident and aftermath. Uncut." James took it slowly. "Why are you giving me this?" "Because one day," Pellick said, "someone will challenge your version of the story. Better you have the truth than let rumor shape it." James pocketed the chip. "Thanks." The symposium hall was unusually quiet for a coalition graduation event. It was tradition, one final joint exercise, followed by recognition of those who demonstrated interspecies leadership, adaptation, and cultural fluency. James wasn't sure which category they believed he fit into. Maybe all 3. The instructor called his name mid-cycle. "Cadet James Halter, step forward." He did, boots firm, posture straight. Not rigid, he'd learned to walk the line between alert and approachable. The hall contained over 70 species, some he'd trained with, others only seen in passing. Every face watched him now, not with fear, but with interest, some with respect. One alien he barely recognized raised a hand and gave a fist-to-chest salute. James nodded back. From the center podium, Captain Ross spoke. Cadet Halter exemplified both the potential and the complexity of cross-species integration. His actions forced us to reevaluate assumptions about command, response, and respect. We commend not only his service, but his compliance, his growth, and his cooperation under intense scrutiny. She paused. "And yes, he broke an admiral's arm, and then showed us why no one should ever make that mistake again." Laughter spread, warm and genuine. James even smiled. Later that night, on the outer viewing deck, he stood alone. Space stretched out before him, the nearest planet a dot across the void. The station's orbit lines flickered faintly along the horizon. Footsteps approached behind him. It was Vor. No escort, no sling. The Admiral stopped beside him and said nothing for a long moment. Then, "Do you know what I thought when I felt the bone snap?" James didn't look over. "I don't imagine it was very flattering." "It wasn't," Vor admitted. "But later, as I lay in recovery, I realized something. Had our positions been reversed, had I been raised where you were, shaped by your world, I likely would have done worse." James turned toward him. "You think so?" "Without hesitation," Vor said, "because survival isn't just instinct, it's education, and I educated myself too late." James nodded once. "Better late than dead." Another pause. "I will be returning to Velkarn Command," Vor said. "But before I go, I've left standing orders that all senior officers undergo reflex training before engaging in joint cadet evaluations. Physical contact will now be governed by species-specific tolerance thresholds. James raised an eyebrow. That's new. It is your fault. James chuckled softly. Vor extended his newly healed arm. Not for a handshake, his species didn't do that, but a gesture of respectful distance, open palm facing outward. James matched it. No contact, just acknowledgement. A new protocol. Then Vor turned and walked away. 3 weeks later, James boarded his new assignment ship. He didn't say goodbye to most of the crew. There was no dramatic send-off. Just a datapad in hand, an official transfer order, and the sense that he was no longer the same person who'd stepped onto the Saracon Dawn months ago. He was assigned to a rapid response diplomatic vessel. Lean, modular, crewed by 5 species, all with known volatility markers. Apparently, he was considered qualified now. The XO met him at the docking bay. "You the Deathworlder?" James shrugged. "One of them." The XO smiled faintly. "Good. We've got a situation in the Zeth quadrant, multi-species standoff. Tensions are high. Could use someone who understands what not to grab when people get excited." James stepped inside the airlock and let it cycle shut. "Just tell them one thing," he said. "What's that?" He turned, expression steady. "Don't touch the collar." The hatch hissed closed behind him.